Dear students, in the previous discussions, we have learned about the extent of pharynx and its subdivisions and also about the nasopharynx. Now, let us discuss about the oropharynx. Let us review this image. So, this part is the nasal cavity and this is the oral cavity. This is the pharynx and the part behind the nasal cavities is the nasopharynx, and then the part behind the oral cavity is the oropharynx, and below it is the laryngopharynx. So the oropharynx extends from the soft palate above to the upper border of the epiglottis. This is the epiglottis, which is the entry into the larynx. This is the larynx. And in this picture also you can see the lateral view and also the posterior view of the various subdivisions of the pharynx, and you can identify the nasopharynx and the oropharynx and laryngopharynx. And this is the soft palate, the boundary between the nasal cavity and oral cavity we are seeing, and this is the uvula, and there is a folds on extending from the uvula, and this is the dorsal aspect of the tongue. This is the upper border of the epiglottis, the entry into the larynx. The oropharynx is the intermediate portion of the pharynx. This is the oropharynx, and it is also known as mesopharynx, and it is located posterior to oral cavity, posterior to the dorsum of tongue you are seeing, and it extends from the soft palate to the level of upper border of the epiglottis, and it is lying in front of the second and third cervical vertebrae and the retropharyngeal space. So the retropharyngeal space is the posterior relation for the oropharynx. Coming to the relations, as you are already aware, posteriorly it is related to the bodies of C2 and 3 vertebrae and anteriorly with the oral cavity. It communicates above with the nasopharynx, below with the laryngopharynx, and anteriorly through the fauces, that narrow passage known as the fauces, which communicates it with the mouth. The main content of the oropharynx is the palatine tonsils, which are situated one in each lateral wall between two pillars. The anterior pillar is known as the palatoglossal arch. Posterior pillar is the palatopharyngeal arch. So between these pillars will be the tonsils located in a triangular fossa, which is known as the tonsillar fossa. So in the tonsillar fossa, the palatine tonsils are lodged. So the fossa is having anterior boundary, the palatoglossal arch. The posterior boundary is the palatopharyngeal arch. So each of these arches, the palatoglossal arch contains the palatoglossus muscle. The palatopharyngeal arch contains the palatopharyngeus muscles. Look into the walls of the oropharynx. The anterior wall, so, is the oropharyngeal isthmus, and which is bounded by the posterior surface of the tongue, which you are seeing the dorsum of the tongue. So the posterior 1/3, which is behind the sulcus terminalis, V-shaped sulcus terminalis, and in front of which you are seeing the circumvallate papilla. Okay, so this forms the anterior wall of it. So the oropharyngeal isthmus part between the soft palate and the dorsum of the tongue you are seeing. The posterior wall will be formed by the mucosa covering the pharyngeal constrictor muscles. Coming to the lateral wall of the oropharynx, it shows two special features. One is the palatopharyngeal fold, okay, which you are seeing in this palatopharyngeal arch or fold, which contains the palatopharyngeus muscle, and it stretches from the uvula to the lateral wall of the pharynx. Then the other important structure here is the palatine tonsil. So it is placed between the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal folds, and the space in which it is located is known as the tonsillar fossa, which is triangular in shape, and the apex of which will be the soft palate, where the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal arches meet, and the base is the dorsal surface of the tongue, that is the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. The lateral wall of this tonsillar fossa is formed by the superior constrictor muscle and styloglossus muscle, both covered inside by the pharyngobasilar fascia. Now let us review the oropharyngeal isthmus, which is a communication between the oral cavity and pharynx. Its boundaries are, if you see in this picture, you are seeing the uvula, which is part of the soft palate. So above it is the soft palate, and below is the dorsal surface of posterior part of tongue, behind the sulcus terminalis and the circumvallate papillae. On either side, we will be seeing the palatoglossal arches containing the palatoglossus muscle, and that forms the anterior tonsillar pillar. And this oropharyngeal isthmus, if you see, it is closed by the contraction of the palatoglossus muscles in deglutition to prevent regurgitation of food from pharynx into the mouth. So let us again review the tonsillar fossa, which is between the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal folds, which is triangular in shape, and the base is in relation with the dorsum of the tongue, and the apex is meeting of the two folds with the soft palate, and there is the lateral wall, which is formed by the superior constrictor muscle of the pharynx. And we will learn in detail about the tonsil when we are discussing about the palatine tonsil. Coming to the functions of the oropharynx, it is both respiratory and digestive in function, as it is the common passage for the food, drink and air. It takes part in deglutition and adds vocal resonance, concerned with taste sensation because of the presence of taste buds in relation with the tongue and the soft palate. Because it contains the palatine tonsil and the lingual tonsils and the Walde's ring, it is local defense and immunity against infections. Then the lining epithelium, it is lined with stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, as it is subjected to abrasion by food particles. The important structures are the two types of tonsils that are present in the oropharynx. One is the palatine tonsils and the other is the lingual tonsils. One between the two folds, that is the palatoglossal and palatopharyngeal folds, that are the palatine tonsils. One on the dorsal aspect of the tongue, or the lingual tonsils.